In today's video, I'm going to go over the pros and cons of being a working event photographer. I think it's real easy for a new photographer to get drawn in by the romanticized version of any type of photography. So what I want to do today is give you guys a good understanding of what event photography, well, the lifestyle is like, and give you the pros and cons of it. If you're a seasoned photographer and you have some additional insight, I would love to hear from you in the comments, so please post those below. The first pro of event photography is that there's always a lot of variety. Maybe one day you're shooting a children's birthday party, and then the next day you're shooting a large corporate event. You might shoot political events on one day in the weekend and then have something you've never even heard of the next day. So you're going to stay engaged with the craft because it's always new and exciting. But variety can be challenging for some. You have to be able to adapt and work in many different types of jobs and environments and scenarios and be able to work on the fly. Pro, event photography is not very seasonal, and for me that works well because I like to work throughout the year. But seasonal work can be a good thing for some. For example, a working teacher might enjoy having their summers off and shooting weddings to fill the time and make some extra money. That said, I do have a bit of a slow period, and that is the end of December to as late or early as March in the year. But typically I am working pretty steadily throughout the year, with my peak probably being earlier December. Next, in comparison to something like weddings, there is low emotional investment. When you're shooting someone's big day, it's like you become a part of their family for a day. With events, you're typically not going to have that same situation. Sometimes you'll really vibe with the client, but most often you're kind of showing up, you're shooting the job, you're doing a quick edit, and you're moving on. But if you enjoy working more intimately with clients, you may prefer portrait photography or wedding photography, where there's going to be a lot more hands-on direction, either one-on-one or with large groups of people. And of course, you may enjoy working one-on-one and creating rather than documenting. Now, I'm not arguing that event photography and the process of documenting is necessarily not creating, but there is a bit of a difference between posing people, telling them exactly what you want them to do, than just observing and capturing it in a creative way. There is a difference, and I think it's worth mentioning. As an event photographer, you will often have more short jobs rather than just a few really long jobs. So for example, if you're doing a commercial shoot, it could be a day of shooting. If you're shooting a wedding, you're typically looking at 8 hours of work. A lot of events fall between 2 to 6 hours. Now, you will have large events here and there. I've done 13-hour days, like back to back to back, but typically I'm shooting approximately, I would say, 4 hours per job. Event photography is typically easier to edit than most types of photography. Take fashion photography, you're going to have to do a lot of skin retouching. With wedding photography, there's a little bit more of an artistic expression in the edit than you would have in events. Because events are best kept neutral with the editing style, you're not going to have as much work to do in post. Typically, I'm adjusting for exposure if necessary, color, contrast, and sharpening, and that's about it. I rarely do black and white conversions. Typically, it's not necessary. A brand would want that option on their own to have that done in-house rather than have no option and then me just telling them, I think this shot should be black and white. But if you enjoy the creative process of editing, I personally don't, you might like shooting something like fashion photography, where you spend more time on differentiating your work in part by aesthetics rather than what you're able to capture. With events, there's less time interacting overall with your client. Now, large corporate events will have more back and forth than a little birthday party, but on average, compared to a wedding or compared to a fashion shoot and a lot of different other types of photography, you are going to do a lot less back and forth before and after an event. Also, in wedding photography, you're typically going to work in a more personal way over a longer period of time through an engagement session and a lot more back and forth with your client. A big pro for me would be the amount of personal time you can have with event photography. If you're booking 3 jobs a week even, which is actually pretty good, you'll still have a lot of time during the week to yourself. If you are good at shooting, you will have less of an edit, meaning you will have more personal time because you're just better at the trade. But if you desire more creative expression in the editing, then you might not like event photography. You might prefer something like fashion photography, where in part a lot of the artistic vision comes in the edit. Whereas event photography, you typically want to differentiate yourself by being able to capture moments better than others and that kind of thing. Additionally, with event photography, you don't want to overly stylize your work because then your client might not be able to use them, or it might not be consistent with their brand's look. One big pro for some will be that there is going to be a lot less pressure than some other types of jobs. For example, a wedding, there is a lot of pressure that you get it right. You are potentially ruining someone's most special day if you get it wrong. Now, I'm not saying there's no pressure shooting a big corporate event or a political event. There certainly will be, and if you're not great under pressure, event photography might not even be right for you. But relative to most things, I would say the pressure is not too severe. But working in a corporate or political environment has its own set of pressures because of the type of people you might be working with. Shooting individual portrait sessions of families, that kind of thing, that's not going to have as much pressure, of course. But of course, it will all depend on the variables. How big is the job? How important is the job? And certainly, large corporate and political events will have a special type of pressure. When you're dealing with really high-powered people, a lot of money is being thrown at something, you want to get it right. I would say event photography has a medium barrier to entry, meaning you need an average amount of gear in order to do the job. Studio photography would require not just more gear, but more expensive gear that an event photographer might not need. But there are certainly genres of photography that you could get away with a lot less. I would say that headshot photography would have the lowest barrier to entry because all you need is one camera body and one lens. Yeah, you should have a backup camera, but if you can reschedule something with a lot of apologies, you could always reschedule a shoot if your camera broke at a headshot session. Typically. With event photography, you have a lot of freedom of choice. For example, you could focus on one type of event like corporate photography, or perhaps you want to be a jack of all trades and take any type of event that comes. But with event photography, you will have plenty of freedom to kind of find a niche or not specialize at all and do it all. Event photography gives you a lot of opportunity to network and meet interesting people that you might not have at different types of events. Typically at a wedding, I never found myself doing much networking. I've always kept it friendly, and I've always, I want to engage with people, but not at the cost where it's taking away from my focus on the job. However, at events, you will have some downtime. You'll have opportunities before, after to network. A lot of people at events will ask for my card, whereas at weddings, they're only asking for my card if they specifically are getting married. This is a pro for some or a con for others, but most events will take place in the evening, leaving your days more open to work on whatever you'd like. That said, there are plenty of day events. Another thing is most events will take place between Thursday and Sunday. That's where 90% of my jobs are booked. I very rarely shoot on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, but when I do, I get really excited because that's like a bonus job because it won't take away from another potential job I could book on the weekend. But some may prefer a more 9-to-5 structured schedule, and if that's the case, portrait photography might be more suitable for you than event photography. Now, I have a few cons for you guys that don't necessarily have a pro to them, and they're not meant to dissuade you from being an event photographer. They're meant to educate you on what you should be prepared for if you decide to pursue this. Now, the first one is that you cannot count on anyone, and you need to get used to having uncertainty. Even when I'm doing really well, even when I have jobs lined up for the month, there's always the question, will I book next month? And no matter how unreasonable it might be, you're always going to have the fear that you won't book the following month. And that never goes away, so you need to be comfortable with uncertainty. You can offset that by having stable sources of income. Like for me, it's always been a very, very, very tiny amount of my income, but I do teach photography for the city of Los Angeles. It's another reason I started my YouTube channel, and although I'm not doing gear reviews and I make very little, I'm able to help people and have a tiny extra source of income, even if it's only like $100. Another tough part about the event photography lifestyle is that you're always going to have FOMO of jobs, fear of missing out on jobs. So it makes it very difficult to take a vacation because you're always going to worry like, uh-oh, what if I get a booking and I'm on vacation, that kind of thing, and I can't do it. And you have to get used to that. And you have to work really hard so that way you can be okay with when you're not able to make as much income. Maybe you get sick and you can't shoot, or maybe you want to take that well-deserved vacation without guilt. And the last kind of a con or a tip is that you really need to educate yourself on finances. For me, I never had anyone do that, so a few years ago, I just read every book imaginable on finances so that I could make sure I'm taking care of myself down the line. I cannot rely on a retirement plan or anything like that. I'm not going to rely on Social Security, obviously. And so making wise investments and being smart with your money is going to be really important if this is going to be your only source of revenue. All right, guys, thank you for watching. So I don't make gear review videos. I make videos I think will actually help people, which makes it really hard to make my channel sustainable. So if you want to support me and also get some extra help from me, I really would love if you would check out my Patreon page and help me in any way you can. You can contribute as little as $5 a month, and that still entitles you to 1 email a month where you can ask me any question you want, and I will give you a thoughtful response. Also, other news is that I have launched a photography course online. It's the pilot program. If you're watching this live, get in touch and I will put you on my list, my wait list at this point to do the class. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you.